Swinburne University of Technology.
Okay, so I'm not Tony Jones, but I'll do my best. So feel free to ask a question, and then you can identify a panellist if you like. So Phil, would you like to stand up and identify yourself, to say your name and the question you'd like to ask?
Phil Hain from CBT Global. The question I've got is, we talk about transforming culture and transformational change, and it's about sort of the triggers. Like, you have a lot of change programs in an organisation. Forever, you have a lot of projects, a lot of programs, and you're forever confronted with having to change things. But we've talked a bit about transforming culture, which seems to be something to be either a much larger thing or triggered by something very significant. So if you're just going along day to day with a lot of change, when does that trigger come in to say, maybe we're not doing it the right way, and maybe we should be transforming our culture?
Okay, all right. So perhaps we could talk, and I don't know where we want to start, and actually Chris, go.
So I'd say it's mindsets. That's if you can make lots of process improvement, you can do an awful lot of step change, but if you want to change mindsets, then you're talking transformation. So, and that's how you change culture.
And what would be the triggers, Chris? What if you were thinking
well,
about triggers?
Health is endlessly getting more and more. You know, we're all going to live until we're 150, it seems, you know, we know what's going to happen with diseases and so on, and we are seeing, say, 15% more people in ED this year than last year, and we have no more money. So you have to fundamentally change. So we've changed everything about the patient journey through, from the time they arrive at the emergency department at the Alfred to how they are dealt with in the inpatient room. So everything, every role, every process, every step was massive.
And I think, to build on Chris's point, something I would say is, in my work with organisations, it's incredible to see how disconnected people are from what's going on outside their organisations. They don't understand the social pressures, they don't understand the economic pressures, they don't understand the environmental pressures. So that can provide a burning platform for shifting culture, but I'm sure you all know that. But it is really interesting sometimes to see people operating very much as business as usual when we're kind of called in, because there's something fundamentally that needs to change and change quickly. So it's interesting.
Can I, Michelle?
Yeah, please.
The agents of change are the people inside the organisation, but we found that it's galvanising events that are the triggers.
Yes.
The galvanising events for us, I think, in the legal fraternity are fear of losing the legal economy that will move out beyond us, and we will sit in the rear. And when you've got 150 to 200 partners, and we have a pecuniary interest in the business that feeds our families, that hip pocket nerve is a big galvaniser. The second is more nebulous, but nevertheless I think a big part of legal practice. It's a fear of the inability to attract and retain a young generation of lawyers whom we don't necessarily fully understand. We're galvanised by what we don't know. How do we get people to stay the course when there are fewer and fewer partnerships on offer, when the road to partnership is now so perilous, when they are an articulate and driven generation, totally unlike anything I was. The idea that I would step up and tell people what I wanted when I was a junior lawyer is just an anathema. Now, that's all they ever do. You might sense how I feel about some of those conversations. But that's a galvanising force. And when you're galvanised by that, when you recognise there is the risk of not being there when the change happens, very often that will be the catalyst for people to realise they've got to change how they operate. Culture comes from that. That's my experience.
Anything to add, Phil? Okay. So, would you like to ask a question? I don't know how. Come down here. You can certainly come down, or I can bring up. Oh, here I go. Look, I'm starting to feel more like Jerry Springer, actually, which is a real worry. Yeah, please do. Please do. There you go. There you go.
Hello, my name is Fran. I work for a government department, so getting rid of people in a diplomatic way isn't quite always possible. So where we're at, we've had 3 machinery government changes in the last few years. We've done a restructure of the IT department, which is where I work. The leadership team have got together and we've talked about behaviours and starting from the top. So shortly, in the next couple of weeks, I'd like to start with talking to the staff. We've done a cultural index and all that jazz, so we know the safe side, always. So my question is, with respect to culture, what is one key theme that each of you might offer to turning around the burnt out, cynical, glass half empty person?
Beautiful, okay. And you'll be able to sell this, I think, if you can get an answer to this. The cynical glass half empty person. You don't have any of those, do you? So Chris, why don't you start off on that? How do you turn that? Is there any key insight that you think makes a difference, particularly around turning around the cynical glass half empty person?
Look, it really works to, I've done a number of these actually, to actually hear from people and just stay there and hear it all. Every whinge, every complaint, you've got to go through that before you can turn around. Every last whinge, anything else I need to hear about. What else has happened in the past? Yes, what else have you tried? I mean it because often, to me, a lot of cynical people are people who were hopeful, and they feel like they've been done over, or they have been, by the organisation. So, we certainly have those people, and I think it's to get connected to them, and but be resilient. Take someone with you to help you with that, because it's exhausting. And I do also think that you've got to find your energy. So you've got to have a group of people who are with you when you're dealing with that sort of a lot of negative energy. And I also, I've had many conversations with people where they've complained about how people get stuck in health services. They think they should be promoted. They've been scientists for many years, and there's no career progression, and so on and so forth. And of course, the great news is that they can leave. They can look around. I really mean that. That it's really important to say to people, you don't have to work here.
I think it's also nice too to celebrate when you crack that tough nut. I think we don't do enough of that. It's expected to just be part of the churn, but that can certainly take a lot of energy as you go through that process. Andrew, glass half empty, cynical.
I think often the assumption is made that the person who is giving off all those vibes, actually has a language set available to them to channel in a way that is both meaningful but also productive rather than destructive. And I say that because I operate in an environment where words are generally our tools, and we misuse them to our heart's content. And so it was quite revelatory to find that equipping some very senior people with a language set that was driven towards constructive feedback and outcomes, rather than necessarily just the same old, what I don't like about this is because I'm no longer treated like a partner, I'm a shareholder in a company and I didn't come here to do that, is you actually give them a facility to say something meaningful. And often that's what they want to do. They want to feel like they've been heard, but they don't have the language set to do it. So equip them. Don't assume they have it.
Great, thank you. Fred, did you have a comment to make about that?
Yeah, so I think two things. One is, it's really important not to let people have a victim mentality. Oh, look at all the things that are happening to me, woe is me, it's happened 10 times. Like Chris said, you've got a choice. You always have a choice in what you do. The other thing I think is, you've got to really show them that this is not going to, the old thing, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture doesn't change in a meeting or You've got to be really clear about the shared values. Chris talked about what do you want to do for your patients, what service you want. Really clear values and really clear strategy about how you do, and then live it, demonstrate it, show you're living your values, because otherwise it's just words. I can say anything. But it's when people go, oh, well, he's actually doing stuff that lines up with the values and is going to help us get to our strategy. So but be prepared for it to take time. It's going to take time.
The other thing that I would add to that is that, it's interesting that we often force people towards change, and we use the language of cynicism and negativity, and we don't realise that we're actually part of reinforcing a pattern. So it's interesting to sometimes to switch that around and show compassion. And people often, I ran a program just recently with an extraordinary practitioner in his field, and he got some positive feedback on a 360-degree feedback instrument, and he started to weep in the group. And it was really one of those moments where, and we think about generations, I was working in the 80s, and we really did development by reminding people of their shortfalls, reminding them where they were inadequate, and we absolutely ground them to within an inch of their life being self-critical. And now we look at them, and they've matured in organisations, and they're still doing that same internal kind of analysis, and what they come out with is what's missing, not what could be or how it could be different. So I take your point about creating a language and also role modelling that. I just think it's, I can see in the eyes of people I'm working with, they're waiting for me to criticise them, particularly in coaching. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Stop it, you're not telling me what I'm doing wrong. I say, well, can I tell you what you're doing right? It's like, having somebody who's a brilliant tennis player and then saying, but your hockey sucks. It's ridiculous that we don't play to people's strengths, and we don't actually celebrate strengths and use that strengths-based language in what we do. So it's very easy to fall into that and feel like you're not doing the right work if you're not being critical, you're not being, cynical yourself, or a little bit sceptical is probably a word I'd prefer to use. So some observations there. Another question. So, sir, would you like to...
My name's John. I work for an engineering company, and I just want to ask particularly for a question about redundancy and that shift. I found that there's been a lot of companies that have gone through that, you said, and then we try and talk about succession planning. So with less people, there's less opportunity, and your employee surveys reflect that sometimes with there's no chance, no one trains because there's nowhere to go. So,
yeah.
The adage of having trained somebody and having leave better,
yeah,
than not training them to stay. So I'm just curious about, we've all done it. It's more important to focus on the day after and that challenge going forward with that succession plan.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's no doubt organisations and ours, there is almost no redundancy. You're down to single point capability. So you've got to cross-train people to be able to manage across perhaps different disciplines, engineering or different disciplines in finance. So lots of cross-training. The training budgets have been cut because you've got to manage your G&A spend against sales ratio, so you've got to manage that. So the reality is that the short-term imperative for shareholder returns and bottom line profitability means you go much leaner than you would in an optimal world be. I think that's just a reality. You've got to be clear about where you want to go, so you're preserving those skills and developing those skills. So again, that's being clear about where the future state is and understanding where you're going to invest your remaining precious resources in bringing young staff through and training them, setting them offshore for some training in other company operations around the world, or functional training or whatever. So it's the reality is it's particularly, and I think we've come out of the bottom, but I think it's going to be a long flat U. So I wouldn't expect any change in the next 2 or 3 years. Broadly, perhaps the luxury car market might be the only bit that seems to be doing really well at the moment, and perhaps property. But in the traditional mining, oil, gas, manufacturing, it's going to remain in this world, and therefore engineering service companies providing support to those industries, it's going to probably persist in the position we are now. I'm not sure that's terribly helpful, but...
I guess I would say too, and it's a great question, it's also finding peers within the industry to understand and to talk about and to actually support each other during particularly difficult times, because I know that manufacturing is in a really difficult period at the moment, so it's excellent to have that connection and be able to discuss what it feels like to be running the way that you are.
Well, I think the other thing is the government is providing lots of industry networks, and they are always running. There's an advanced carbon fibre group together. There was a thing on the synchrotron the other day. There's lots of opportunities, like you are all here today investing in your own development. There's lots of opportunities to get out there outside the company structure. Don't always rely on the company to do it. Search out the services provided by government or your Engineers Australia or whatever, and work out how you can create those networks. Build that wide network of professional practice outside your own organisation.
Okay, so we're getting very close to time, so I wouldn't mind just wrapping up now, but I wanted to ask just a quick comment from each of the panellists before they actually depart. Now, I'm curious about what's your challenge, your current challenge about in regard to being the leader that you'd like to be? What's on your radar at the moment at a personal level and at a developmental level? They love it when I ask these questions.
Ladies first.
I think we all have said that. I think resilience, actually. That it's exhausting, really, to be always, which is, most of my time spent on sort of big change. So that's exhausting. And to develop the next, for me, I've really shifted to really think I've got four teams and one of the teams, and some exceptional leaders. So really investing in them is lots of development. They're all early 30s and mid-30s, and it's time for them to fly really. So I think that's a lot of my job.
Thank you. Okay.
There is a saying, many are called, few are chosen, and I think in the fraternity in the profession in which I work, at the level at which I work, it's becoming quite apparent that the opportunity to become a partner, and certainly a partner operating at the level I'm privileged to operate at, are few and far between. And how do you have a meaningful career conversation with an incredibly astute, intelligent, capable lawyer who has so much to offer the profession, but for whom the prospect of them being the one turtle that actually grows to full age is, from the 300,000 that hatch, is a very, very significant challenge. And it's not a conversation that I want to do uneducated, because I can say all the right things and have all the wrong impacts. So for me, in my environment, it's how to have those conversations that I'm currently most challenged by in this context.
Great, thank you.
We'll leave aside the rest of practice of law for another night.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Andrew. And Fred?
Look, I think we're coming out of our immediate change journey, and all the metrics in terms of measure that change has been reasonably successful in terms of retention. Involuntary departures are less than 10%, so we're pretty well stabilised. It's more, how do I protect the jobs and grow the business again? How do I protect our staff's livelihood and their lives and their kids and their wife? How do I work with our sales group? Because everyone's capital averse at the moment. How do you make my sales team as successful as I can? Because in the end, they drive the existence of everyone else. We can make and secure and service as many machines as we want, but we've got to convince the customer base that they should part with their cash, and that's pretty challenging in this environment. So it's just, how do I provide that leadership so you don't get discouraged, so you keep leading in difficult times. But I think that, as I said, I think that's something we as leaders have to be prepared for the next couple of years. It's a marathon. Turtles will win, I think.
So I'd just like to say a very heartfelt thank you to my panel members tonight, Fred, Andrew and Chris. So if you could put your hands together and just say thank you.
This has been a Swinburne production.